The ocean stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of water that seemed to swallow the horizon. For weeks, the men on board had seen nothing but waves, skies, and stars. They whispered among themselves, wondering if they had been led into certain death. Fear was thick in the air. The sailors prayed in silence, cursed under their breath, and some even spoke of mutiny. At the center of it all stood one man, Christopher Columbus, a navigator from Genoa, convinced that beyond this endless blue lay riches, spices, and the glory of Asia. He was wrong, but his mistake would change the course of human history forever. Long before Columbus was born, stories of unknown lands beyond the ocean traveled. Through whispers in ancient maps, Norse explorers, led by Leif Erikson, had once touched the shores of a place they called Vinland, nearly 5 centuries before Columbus ever sailed. Yet their journeys faded into legend, forgotten by most of Europe. By the 15th century, the world of Europe was desperate for trade. The silk and spices of Asia were treasures everyone craved. But the long routes through the Middle East were controlled by rivals. Portugal was carving its way around Africa, sending ships south to round the Cape of Good Hope. Spain, newly united under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, needed a bold gamble to rise against its competitor. Columbus, ambitious and stubborn, offered them that gamble. He believed Asia could be reached by sailing west, straight across the Atlantic. His calculations were flawed. He thought the Earth was much smaller than it really was, but his conviction was unshakable. For years he was turned away by kings and courts, laughed at, dismissed. But in 1492, the Spanish crown gave him ships, crew, and the promise of rewards if he succeeded. It was a decision that would ripple across centuries. On August 3, 1492, 3 ships left Spain, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Wooden hulls creaked, sails stretched against the wind, and men clung to hope. They carried little certainty, only a leader who insisted that the ocean was a pathway and not a prison. Days turned to weeks, and the endless water tested their sanity. The men grew restless, demanding to turn back. Columbus held them with promises, with stern discipline, and with his unshakable belief that land was near. On the night of October 11th, a lookout spotted a faint line on the horizon. By dawn, it was clear. They had found land. The island was lush, green, and alive with people. Columbus stepped ashore, planting the banner of Spain into the soil. Believing he had reached islands near Asia, he called the people Indians, certain that he had arrived in the East. But these were not Asians. They were the native, inhabitants of the Caribbean, people whose ancestors had lived on these islands for centuries. For the natives, the arrival of pale-skinned men on strange ships must have seemed like a vision from another world. They greeted the strangers with gifts, hospitality, and curiosity. But to Columbus, they were more than neighbors. He saw in them opportunity, labor, and souls to be converted. The meeting of these two worlds was both wondrous and tragic. At first, it was a story of exchange. Gifts of food, feathers, shells, and simple ornaments passed from hand to hand. Yet beneath the smiles lay a future of conquest, disease, and suffering. Columbus returned to Spain with tales of discovery, bringing a handful of natives, colorful birds, and strange fruits. He was celebrated as a hero, the man who had opened the gates to new lands. The monarchs promised him more voyages, and Columbus would return again and again, convinced until his death that he had reached the edge of Asia. But what he had truly done was connect two halves of the world that had been separated for millennia. His voyage sparked an age of exploration, conquest, and colonization. In the years that followed, the Americas became the target of European ambition. Spain built an empire that stretched across oceans, pouring gold and silver into its coffers. Portugal, France, and England soon followed. Entire civilizations of the Americas, the Aztec, the Maya, the Inca, would fall to European steel and disease. Millions of native people would perish, their lands taken, their cultures disrupted. What began with Columbus's first step onto Caribbean sand became one of the greatest turning points in human history. Columbus himself was both a visionary and a deeply flawed man. He had courage few could deny, the will to sail where others would not. Yet he was also consumed by greed, by the hunger for power, and by the willingness to enslave those he encountered. He left behind not just a path across the ocean, but a legacy of violence that generations would remember. For centuries, he was celebrated as the discoverer of America, a hero of exploration. Today, he is remembered with more complexity, as both the man who opened the door and the man who brought suffering through it. The story of America's discovery is larger than Columbus himself. It is the story of human ambition, of dreams that reach beyond horizons, and of the consequences of those dreams. It is the story of an ocean that once divided worlds but became a bridge. It is the story of encounters that shaped nations, cultures, and identities. From that first landing in 1492 grew the colonies, the revolutions, and ultimately the United States of America. None of it would have happened without that voyage. An error in calculation that changed everything. Imagine the moment the ships first touched the shore, sails falling limp as anchors splashed into shallow waters. Imagine the men climbing down, feet pressing into sand they had never seen before. Imagine the natives watching from the trees, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Two worlds had met, and nothing would ever be the same again. The discovery of America was not the discovery of empty land. It was the meeting of civilizations, the collision of cultures, and the start of a story that continues to this